Welcome to another episode of the Silmarillion sessions. I'm Dr. Mikael Thompson, and this is my co-host, Mr. William Lasseter. And today we're going to continue with the Valaquenta, the accounting of the Valar. Really, that's just the translation of what Valaquenta means. It's the account of the Valar, but it also includes the Maiar, and in other words, these are the spiritual beings of some sort of higher power that inhabit and in many ways govern or have auspices over certain aspects of life on Middle Earth or in Middle Earth, the whole world, Arda, really within Tolkien's Legendarium. And of course, we'll be going, as we begin the Silmarillion, we'll see how they interact with each other. But with the last episode, we introduced the Valar. Who are they, and who are some of the, essentially, who are the top, the top five Valar? Two couples, two pairs, and Ulmo, who's single. Most of them are espoused. Most of them are espoused. A masculine and a feminine power, a masculine power and a feminine power. Then Ulmo has no spouse, and he's the god of the sea. And today we're continuing the list, and I think we actually begin with what I think is a very interesting pair, and that is the Feanturi, the masters of spirits. For they are brethren, not necessarily espoused, but they're brethren, a brother and sister, that is, and they are called most often Mandos and Lorien. So those of you who are more familiar with Tolkien's writings may recognize Mandos, and those are rather familiar with the Silmarillion. You know about Mandos. That's the holes. That's the Lord of the Dead. That's Hades, right? Essentially, that's that guy. And Lorien is a name most people should recognize. Anybody who's had any contact with the Lord of the Rings knows that Lorien is also one of the names that's taken for Lothlorien or Laurelin Dorame. I butchered that part, whatever that is. Galadriel's famous enchanted garden forest in Middle-earth, where Frodo and company find rest after Gandalf is taken from them. And there is a connection there, but we'll see a little bit what that is. Well, that'll become more obvious in the Silmarillion proper. I think that's a great one to start, because if I can just launch it off right into here and pass it over to you, William, is that Mandos, it says they are most often called Mandos and Lorien, yet these are rightly the names of the places of their dwelling. So it's not their names. They're named after the place. In the same way as we talk about Hades, the guy, the god, the Greek god of the underworld, and Hades, meaning the abode of the dead. So Tolkien's clarifying for us here is that really Hades, or Mandos, is the place of his dwelling. He says their true names are Namo and Irmo. So Namo is Mandos, or rather he's the Vala who dwells in Mandos, and Irmo is Lorien, or rather she's the Vala who dwells in Lorien. Or he. So two brothers, Namo and Irmo. Why do they have two different names? What's the significance of a name?
Yeah, that's kind of a common practice. You see that a lot in Greek mythology, for instance, and also in Celtic mythology. That the realm that they control is what they're named after. We even see this in medieval history. A guy might be called, or even a lady might be called, the Lord of such and such, but he's referred to as such and such.
Oh, sure.
Classic example that students always get wrong. George Gordon is not named Byron. That's not, Byron is the family. That's the household that he's the Lord of. So right. He's Lord Byron, see, and his
first name isn't Lord, his last name's Byron?
Yeah, right. His name is George. He's not Byron, he's George. But people call him Byron all the time. They the name of the family household that he was the inheritor of. And right, so this is pretty common.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's a good point. Just like somebody may be named Holdhurst or Brideshead, when in fact you're simply the Lord of that place.
Yep.
Right.
And so it's not necessarily unheard of that you'd have these characters that were named after the realm that they inhabit. As a matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, even Hades, because you mentioned Hades, Hades is not Hades. Hades is actually the realm he governs over. This is just a quick tangent. When It's speculated that the three major gods of Greece, who are Poseidon, Hades, and Zeus, are all the same god, but that they were subsequently pushed out by successive waves of invasion from the north. So you had people from the steppes area coming down into Greece, and when they came into Greece, they met in conflict or otherwise with the people that were already there in Greece, and they said, our God is the only God, but your God is important, so we're going to give him another realm. But we know this because the ending of the names are the same. A deus or a Zeus, that's the same word tagged onto something. So Hadzeus is the big guy, the guy god of the underworld, the under realm underneath. But he's not Hades. That's the realm he controls.
Right.
He's referred to as Plutus, the wealthy one. And he has numerous other names, but Hades is actually the realm he governs, not his actual name.
Right, that's a very good point.
So yeah, it happens.
And it occurs to me too, we see that with Fangorn himself. Fangorn is the forest, and Fangorn is the chief tree, the lord of Fangorn is in fact, that's his proper name, as it can be rendered into at least Elvish.
Yeah.
But what I think is interesting here too, because so you've got that distinction, that's common enough, but I would bet that only the ultra nerds of Tolkien writings, lore and stuff, have even ever heard Namo and Irmo as the names, right? Like there's a certain secretive nature to them, which seems to fit also their role. Like this is the Lord of the Dead. He has a name, but we don't commonly use it, Or Irmo is the master of visions and dreams.
Right.
What is that? Essentially, that's what's his name? Who gives dreams? Well, it's the who gives dreams. Morpheus.
Morpheus. Right. There you go. Yeah.
The bringer of dreams, which are it's vague and shadowy. We know there are dreams, but the content of them fade. We know there's a land of the dead, but I'm not on a first name basis with the Lord of the Dead, never having been to his place, as it were. Because if I was, I wouldn't be back here.
Morpheus, what if I told you they were the same realm?
Right.
There is no spoon. That's kind
of
the point that you're getting at, that Tolkien's getting at. Dreams come from the realm of death. There's the realm of dreams. This is there's a really profound psychology going on here. When you tap into the realm of dreams, you're tapping into a realm that has an existence. And it's kind of the realm, I suppose we say, we go to, aside from salvation, when we die. So those two realms, they're intimately united, almost like twin brothers or something. You can't extricate the one from the other.
Right.
And we even say that sleep is like a second death, or like a first death. Sleep and death are so similar that they've been commented on by poets for generations. Hamlet, for instance, is a great example. Aristotle talks about this. When a person is sleeping, it's as though they were dead. And we even say, I slept like the dead,
Right. In this sleep of death, what dreams may come.
What dreams may come when we shuffle off this mortal coil must give us pause. It's this idea that the two realms are intimately united with each other. And I don't want to go too deep into this rabbit hole, to use the metaphor again, a matrix.
Follow the white rabbit.
But take the red pill, take the blue pill. If, for instance, we were to look at people that have tried to access dreams, lucid dreaming, for instance, LSD trips, things like that, there's a startling consistency in the types of images that show up in dreams. In other words, people that have never talked with each other and have never even read about certain things have dreams that have in them what I think Jung called them archetypes, I think they were called.
Yeah, I think it's his general.
And I know that theory does just come under suspicion and all this, but it is really startling to me that whether Jung was right or not, people do seem to have similar imagery in their dreams on a regular basis. Joseph Campbell talked about this. He talked about how the myth is the public dream and the dream is the private myth. So that our public imagery, our public mythology is kind of emerging out of the dreams that we have, which are consistent with humanity itself, not just with the culture we live in,
Right.
humanity itself.
Yeah, no, that's very true.
So really, these two brothers, they are. It makes total sense that they are twins to each other,
Right.
and that it
It
makes total
does.
sense too that the dream giver, the Morpheus character, is he emerges out of the land of the dead, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Right. That they're brethren, and they each do have a spouse. But they're listed. You have to say they're named together as brothers, and then separately they're named as having a spouse. So I think you're absolutely right that it's that kinship between the two of them that is really emphasized here. And the spouse of Namo, the Lord of the Dead, the Lord of Mandos, is well, he's the doomsman of the Valar, right? Namo is. The spouse is named Vaire, the Weaver. Vaire the Weaver. So she's essentially Clotho. She weaves all things that have ever been in time into her storied webs, and the holes of Mandos that ever widen as the ages pass are clothed with them. So anything that ever has been is woven into her cloth and adorns like tapestries the ever-growing halls of Mandos, the ever-growing halls of Hades.
Yeah,
That's pretty cool.
that is cool.
The
And honestly, Cameron, I hate to say it, this is my background. When I'm reading that, I'm thinking, Dreamweaver,
weave
make it in my life. It's like
through the
that's
night,
an
which brings us
image
back
which,
to the other guy.
yeah, right. Weaving of
It's
dreams
all in.
again. That's wow, what a great image. The Weaver is like the dream, the spinner of webs. Which, by the way, kids, that's foreshadowing. Just so you know.
Be aware.
The spinner of webs, the spinner of dreams. There's even that Native American thing of the dream catcher. It's a woven image
Yes.
where it catches bad dreams so that they don't go out into the world. I think that's how it works. But yeah, that imagery of weaving connected to dreams, it's such a great image. Why? Here's the question to ask. Why do we create art if it isn't to somehow capture dreams? To give message or to give face or to give imagery to the private myth that we have been given.
Mm-hmm.
I first started thinking about this when I read about the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, by
Oh,
Coleridge.
sure.
What prompted Coleridge to write a poem like that? It's a powerful poem, but
Not just a bad experience at sea.
Yeah,
Get
no,
seasick.
no, it wasn't that. It wasn't just his working his own yayas out. Um, it was a dream of some kind, a vision that had come to him, and that he tried to
Yeah.
weave it into a poem. So,
Which,
yeah.
so yeah, so I mean, Dante ostensibly is doing the same thing, right? With the whole Divine Comedy is, look, I just had this crazy dream or a series of dream things, and I'm going to try and write this out. To say nothing, of course, obviously the poet, the shop of the Dream of the Rood is of course
Right.
a dream,
Dream of the Rood.
But I had a dream, but
Yeah.
also Tolkien's work. A lot of what he does arises out of not just profound insight. And obviously, there's material and sources that he's drawing from, but he dreams these things. These things come to him, and he's inspired. Even the famous beginning of The Hobbit, which he had already been working on, the whole content of the Silmarillion. Remember, he was priming. He had primed himself in many ways for this. But he sat down, right? He was grading, as you do, and he's bored grading these books, and decides to sketch on the side of something that says, "In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit." Like that's a sort of vision. It's just something that kind of, I mean, that's from Elfland, right? You spoke the words without knowing where they came from, but they flowed somehow from within. And that's a phenomenon that, of course, we see in his stories again and again.
Xanadu did
And
on a stately pleasure dome decree, right? That whole Xanadu.
Exactly.
Yeah, so to clarify, because I've been talking about the dream weaver here and all this, it's not really a dream weaver because actually she is his brother's wife. So I suppose, all four characters are connected, okay?
Exactly.
The two brothers, the two wives. But we got to make clear that the weaver is the wife of Mandos.
Right. Or exactly. The weaver who weaves everything, all things that ever have been,
Yeah.
that have ever been in time. And she's the spouse of Namo, often commonly known as Mandos, and he knows all things that shall be.
Yeah.
So Tolkien, the philologist, he's instructing us in some grammar here, mythologizing some grammar. So the guy who's in charge of the dead, he evidently already knows everybody who's coming to him, right? Who will be his charges in time, because he knows everything that shall be, except only those things that still lie in the freedom of Iluvatar, which includes man's free will, as we'll get to when we see the creation of man. His wife is Vaira, the weaver. She's his spouse, and she weaves all things that ever have been, so past-oriented. They're the spouse. They're intimately connected to Namo, Mandos, his brother, Irmo, also called Lorien. Irmo, he's slightly younger than Mandos, is the master of visions and dreams. His spouse is Este, the gentle. Este the gentle. She's the healer of hurts and weariness. Gray is her raiment, and rest is her gift. She gives the gift of rest. He's the giver of dreams. Namo, Mandos, is the giver of a bigger rest, and his spouse is the weaver of all things that have been. So she knows your past, he knows your future. So it's kind of the whole sleep dream thing scaled up to a more existential level, I suppose you could say.
Yes, yes, yes. You know, one of the things I really think is important when you're reading, especially the Silmarillion, is these first two sections you kind of have to go through carefully because he's packing a lot of information into what's each character. So you find out that Mandos knows all things, that he's the Lord of the Dead, that he doesn't reveal his stuff unless prompted by Manwe. So you got all this stuff you got to kind of chew on. But one of the things that is really fascinating to me is how Tolkien viewed death in general. You just mentioned that. How did you put it? Death is sort of the dream and the balm magnified, I guess, is one way. But you could also look at it the reverse way. Death and the weaver, they are frequently seen as terrifying.
Yes.
But he sees it the opposite way. It's almost like for him, Mandos and Vaira are they're a balm. You know, there is a release there.
There be a balm in Gilead.
Yeah, they are a balm.
Makes the wounded whole.
Yeah.
And I mean, so that's exactly, because that's one of the things that the gift of Iluvatar, sometimes referred to as the gift of Mandos, is this fate of men that they get to die. That is somehow a privilege that the elves envy, where they fade with the world, and they can go to Elvenhome. Even they get slain, they don't leave Arda. They don't ever leave the world. They go to the halls of Mandos, they can rest and kind of maybe eventually kind of come back. You know, some do. Otherwise, they dwell in Elvenhome, and they have a fate that awaits them at the consummation of all things, but they don't know what that is. And there's one thing that's inscrutable. There's a beautiful dialogue written somewhere, I can't remember what it's properly titled, that Tolkien wrote, where these two elves are discussing these strange new creatures called men, and that they have this gift that the fate, the destiny of man ultimately is unknown to them or even to any of the Valar, but that Iluvatar has given them this strange gift of death, whereby they get to exit the world into what we don't know. They don't know it, they don't understand it, but that somehow death is not the end of a human being's life, but death is somehow a mystical transition out of this world into something else, with the presumption that somehow into something higher, something more beautiful yet.
And that's a tremendous vision, which in many ways has been lost in the modern world. It is the fear that Hamlet wrestles with in the great play by Shakespeare. He comes to the conclusion that the rest is actually silence. That there's a quiet there from all the turbulence of life, you know, all the words and words held in there. But to come to that vision, which I honestly think that was the project of most religions, was to bring a person to come to that vision, that death is actually a gift. You know, that there is an order and a structure to the universe which is quite beautiful, and that we become one with it when we die. And I think most great religions were trying to prompt people to that, to reinforce that. And they did it in some ways against the tidal wave of despair that happens.
Right. Right. I mean, even the sort of, we I think derisively think about it or talk about it, poo-poo it as sort of a frat house, world of Nordic mythology, that you die in glory of battle and enter the great mead hall in the sky where you can chop each other up for all the time. But like, there's a sense, I think, that's actually much deeper when we understand what's going on there, that their death too is seen as a gift, right? The glorious death in battle is still it's in exiting from this particular
Ah,
plane of existence into something more godlike,
give your arm
expressed in its own way.
to give your arm to the great battle against Ragnarok itself. Make that
To be chosen.
So yeah, to be
So,
chosen and to make the choice to join with the great powers rather
right.
than the powers of chaos and darkness.
Because then you've got the difference in being just a low life slumming around, hanging out in the slums, being called by the kings, chieftains, whatever, into some bigger battle. Like, sweet, sign me up, I'll go. I mean, there's something to that, I think, even there. And this, I think, more poetically, to bring it back in with Tolkien, is it's the same sense of what actually in the movie. This is the one thing not the one of the rare times where we'll give Jackson some credit, or at least his scriptwriters, places in the mouth of Gandalf talking about death, what in the actual text is the essential natural closing of the Lord of the Rings at the very end, with Frodo entering in, so leaving, on the ship, and he sees the rain falling. They pass through the curtain of rain, and what Sam and Merry and Pippin saw was the ship disappearing over the horizon. And what Frodo saw was then they passed through this sheet of rain like a veil, and then they saw a bright green country under a swift sunrise. Right. And the movie adaptation beautifully puts that into the mouth of Gandalf when Gondor's being stormed, and he explains to Pippin what death is like. And he has the authority to do so, having recently died and come back.
That's right. I remember that.
And he says to Pippin, it's death is not so bad. Imagine, passing through a veil, something like this all fades away like a veil. And then what you see before you is a bright, bright green kind of a far green country under a swift sunrise. He says, "Oh, that's not so bad." No, it's not.
Not at all.
It's a leaving of this veil of sorrow.
Yeah, it is, and it's a vision which I think allows a person not just to function but to triumph in this world and in the next.
Mm-hmm.
I get a little incensed at the modern era on a number of different levels. But one of the levels that I get most incensed is the idea that we should throw out all these antiquated visions for the modern progressive vision that there is nothing else. This is materialistic and nothing else, and now go do your job. This sort of bleak hopelessness that the modern era offers as a sort of counterweight to the vision like what Tolkien is suggesting, which is why I get so incensed at so many different novels in the 20th century and the 21st, because so many of them are espousing this sort of a thing. And Tolkien stands out as one of the few that says, no, this is the vision that's been around for thousands of years. More than that, the whole history of mankind has been this sort of vision of greatness and beauty, and that, as you say, the green hills far away. And we shouldn't abandon it, because it is crucial to what we think of ourselves and how we function in the world. To see, for instance, Mandos and Lorien as being a balm, both of them, that's really striking, really striking. All of our art, I think, has been an attempt, for most of all of human history, has been an attempt to grapple with the nature of death, and to grapple with how do we view it. Do we view it as beautiful? and something that we long for, or do we view it as horrible and terrifying?
Right.
And if we see it as horrible and terrifying, we don't read this and we don't create this sort of thing. We just
Yeah.
sort of fade and die away and become corrupt and start shooting everything.
Right. Well, because if that's all there is for you.
Because
life is just a screaming into the void until you finally plunge in.
Yeah. Until the
And
bullet
then what
hits
is there?
you. If that's the choice, because I honestly think it comes down to that stark. It's kind of a stark choice, but that's the choice. It's either you go screaming into the void until the bullet hits you, till the bullet hits the bone, or or you go into those, you pass through that golden veil and see the bright green hills rolling away. And honestly, if that's the choice, I'm sorry, I choose life.
Right.
So okay, I don't mean to hold up the ship too
And
much.
I think no, this is good because this is almost built as a dialogue. There's a dialectic with our invisible interlocutor who would say, yeah, well, isn't that just basically, pleasant self-delusion? Isn't that just opiate? That says, well, you can be happier with your miserable life. It's still going to be the same. You can delude yourself. Sure, it might be useful, might make us all get along better if you take your sugar, take your happy pills, and then imagine that death is somehow a gift. Sure, go ahead. If that's what helps you sleep at night, ironically, do so. But death is still the end, and it's awful, and we should fear it or something. Except you can't resist it, so don't fear it. Go full nihilist on this, or at least the modern cynic. What's the Valar? This is still not even the Maiar. These are the Valar. The Valar who's listed right after this. Oh, so it's the fountains of Irmo and Este. Este being the spouse of Irmo. She's the one who gives rest, right? She's the healer of hurts and weariness. Even the Valar themselves come often into Lorien, their realm, to find repose and easing of the burden of Arda. So the gods themselves find healing and refreshment in Lorien, which we should immediately think Galadriel, when she's replicating, she's making sort of a scaled down model version of what she remembers having learned about and seen from a distance. We'll see her story when she creates Lothlorien in Middle Earth. She names it that, and it's shorthanded as Lorien for this very reason, to be an allusion, a connection to, an echo of, where even the place where even the gods find rest and refreshment, which naturally, of course, we see the company do when they arrive after Gandalf's death.
It's kind of cool. Lothlorien means dream flower. Loth is flower, and Lorien is dream. It's a dream flower, like a lotus opening up.
Yes, that's great. But against the cynic who says, great, you eat your lotus flower, I'm going to hop back on the ship. Lest we think that Tolkien would be so simplistic, he says, mightier than Este, so Este is the giver of rest and the healer of hurts and weariness, even mightier still is Nienna. She's the sister of these Feanturi. The Feanturi are these four. Namo Mandos, his spouse, Vaira the Weaver, Irmo, the master of visions and dreams, and Este, his spouse, the giver of rest, gentle healer of hurts. Mm-hmm. The sister of these four, but the sister of Mandos and Lorien, more mighty even than Este, who's the healer of hurts, is Nienna. She dwells alone, so she too is unspoused. That's how you still have an even coupling, almost single, and she's single. He's the Lord of the Waters. Nienna dwells alone. She is acquainted with grief. That we're just told that. Usually we're told, okay, here they are, and he's the Lord of. She's the wound that Arda, that's the earth, has suffered in the marring of Melkor. So all the evil that has happened in the world, all the pain and suffering has happened to the world, even the wounding of the earth itself, she feels this suffering. So great was her sorrow that as the music, capital M, as the music unfolded, that her song turned into a lamentation long before its end, and the sound of mourning, grieving, was woven already into the themes of the world before it began. So that this sense of grief, this sense of this penthos is already woven into the fabric of existence itself, because even one of the gods is more deeply acquainted with grief, with sorrow, with grief and sorrow, with suffering, more than any of us ever could be.
Yes. It's part of the old Catholic tradition, right? I am a man acquainted with grief. That whole lamentation of Jeremiah, that the sequence of Maundy, Thursday, and Good Friday is equally important in being able to experience the resurrection. That there's a deep sorrow at the same time that there is this great song and joy and all these creation of things. It's not as though believers, for instance, it's not so believers are just Pollyannish and think everything's sugar coated. Tolkien's getting at something here.
Least of all Tolkien, right? He's famously, like, as his personality is much more pessimistic.
Oh, I know.
He's got a sour look.
We're getting ahead of ourselves because we do want to talk about his time travel stuff further on. But it was funny going over it. He makes himself a Hungarian philologist in that work. And I thought that was perfect. The Hungarian spirit, the sort of like doer kind of lugubrious. I thought that was pretty funny on his part.
It's like my goulash.
Yeah, right, exactly. But I think that he very much understood that there is the end word is not sorrow. The end word is joy. The end of all things is joy. But that doesn't mean that it's unalloyed with sorrow. There is always this sense of the tragedy of life, as Unamuno wrote, that doesn't go away for anybody that has half a brain. You always feel that these things are passing. And as a matter of fact, I think that if you didn't realize that these things are passing, you wouldn't be capable of love, because love itself, it recognizes, real love recognizes that these things are temporary. These people that we love are temporary. Even these great, beautiful institutions and ideas are temporary.
Yes.
And if you didn't feel sorrow at it, that would mean that you really didn't love it. Because it's sorrowful to see these things. Not forever, but you have to have that recognition that sorrow is a reality and just move
even
on.
unto the end of time.
Even unto
but
the end.
Not eternally, because time too itself is something that comes to an end. Yet there's somehow an after.
Yes.
There is an after time space.
And isn't it interesting that Nienna is a female figure too? I find that interesting.
Yeah, she is.
Just as Varda Elbereth is Varda, right? Yeah. Just as Elbereth is a female character that sort of embodies the Virgin Mary, so Nienna embodies Our Lady of Sorrows, a major figure in the Catholic Church. This image of Mary as weeping for the death of her.
The Mater Dolorosa, famous, like really exuberantly depicted in Spanish and Sicilian Baroque statuary. These it's just.
And if you've never
found images,
you probably have, but if you haven't ever listened to the Mater Dolorosa, for instance, the Stabat Mater, especially Pergolesi, I think it is.
The Pergolesi, yeah.
Pergolesi. If you haven't ever listened to the Pergolesi Stabat Mater, you really have to treat yourself, and listen to that, because gosh, it just, the well of sorrow that can be brought up there is incredible. And it's not something to shy away from. I think Tolkien is really good in this. He doesn't shy away from these sad moments. He's not writing some work where everything just happens to work out and everybody's just jolly and drinking beer like, hobbits. It's he's very aware of sorrow and works it into his work over and over again. And yet, it's interesting. It says the windows of her house look outward from the walls of the world.
She looks out beyond the world. Her windows are west of west.
Yeah.
Now, Mandos is west of Valinor.
Yeah.
Her window, her house is west of west. She lives beyond death. She lives further out than death. Death is at the end of town. She's just outside the last, the county lines.
That's
It's
right.
just right at the edge.
The bar at the end of town, death.
The bar at the end of town, it's death.
And hers is beyond.
Somebody out there somewhere, you're going to make a bar at the end of town, call it the Halls of Mandos.
Yeah, the Halls of Mandos. That's a great name for a bar, isn't it?
That's right.
Yes, I love that. I love that.
But unlike well, there are other traditions that talk about constant sorrow, and but unlike the man of constant sorrow who's seen trouble all his days, is not weeping for herself, right? She's weeping. So those who listen to her learn pity and endurance in hope. She's not weeping for herself. This is something that Tolstoy draws a sharp contrast with, or sort of plays ironically. We can see a sharp contrast between Niena and his character, the wife of Ivan Ilyich. So the death of Ivan Ilyich in his frankly short story, the death of Ivan Ilyich, his wife is distraught over how much she suffered in those last weeks of his death, of his dying, because it's really been, put her out of her ordinary routine, made things rather uncomfortable at home. And you don't know how I've suffered having him, drag on like this, essentially, because how she's presented, very, very different, right? That here you've got somebody who's weeping not for herself, but those who die, right? So those who wait in Mandos. And that's the other thing. The Halls of the Dead, as Tolkien is depicting them, is not a final destination. It's a waiting place. It's like some big train station. We're all waiting in the traveler's waiting lounge. But those who wait in Mandos cry to her, and she, who's acquainted with sorrow, right? She's she's the sort of archetype of penthos, of mourning, of sorrow. She brings strength to the spirit and turns sorrow into wisdom.
That's crucial. That's crucial.
Sorrow into wisdom. It's not this, let's get down on ourselves, everything is terrible, it's all dying, isn't that so sad? And you become almost self-indulgent. There are people who do this. They can become very self-indulgent on, it's so terrible, isn't it so sad? All these things are happening, and I'm just weeping and mourning and crying myself into oblivion. She turns sorrow into wisdom. There's something else there.
That's really important. I mean, I know that the Bible talks about how Lady Wisdom exists. I think this is Ecclesiastes. The Lady Wisdom exists before anything else was created. From the very beginning of things, She was one with the Lord. Wisdom is the thing to be sought after more than any other riches. And how do you get wisdom? You get wisdom through Niena, through the sorrow that's a legitimate sorrow. There's a great saying in Greek, which I'll probably mangle here. It's Drasanta pathos pathai mathos. Drasanta pathos pathai mathos. That translates roughly as the experience brings suffering, the suffering brings wisdom. I love that. It's a great insight into it. The experience brings suffering, the suffering brings wisdom. So Tolkien seems, again, to be suggesting here that one can't shy away from the suffering. You can't gloss it over or sweep it under the rug, or like you mentioned in Tolstoy, a gripe about it because it disrupts your tea parties, or your capitalist system or your communist vision of the world. You have to face the reality of human suffering.
And allow it to flourish in some way. That feeling. Not suffering to flourish, but like, okay, so we've suffered. To be able to give vent and space and allow that bloom to blossom. Yep. Because then it can become wisdom.
Yeah. So to endure in hope that there's a purpose to this. To endure in hope.
Which is actually what Aragorn says about Meriadoc after he experiences the Black Breath. He stabs the Nazgul, and he's hovering. At death's door. He's kind of passing in and out of the threshold there for a while, and he says something. And Aragorn, once he's healed him, says something of him that he'll recover, but his sorrows won't destroy. Essentially, his sorrows won't crush him, but they will turn to wisdom, or whether they will teach him wisdom. and he comes back as, when he recovers, he's fully. They come back, they scour the Shire. That's Merry and Pippin become these great lordly heroes who not only cleanse the Shire, but they become this. They themselves embody this rallying cry to become something more.
Yeah.
And they really become these two noble spirits among the Shire folk.
Because they've been given a certain gravity that the other hobbits really don't have.
Exactly.
There's a great story by George MacDonald called The Light Princess. There, the main character, who is light, she floats away, literally, and takes nothing seriously. She finally has to reckon herself with the fact that this man that she loves is going to die. And when she does so, she finally gains gravity and can walk on the earth. It's an interesting little story, and MacDonald was a big influence on Tolkien and others. So Daddy was thinking about this idea of what is that relationship, wisdom and sorrow and suffering. It's wrought,
certainly something.
He has an idea, because it's wrought throughout the work. Melkor, even though he's exiled, plays a crucial role in the development of the world.
Right.
This is something which is very hard for us to get our minds around, to be honest. Even in the Christian sphere, Satan does the will of God. That's really hard to get our minds around, because we think Satan is completely against God and that he's totally the enemy. He's even called the enemy Satan. But there's nothing outside of the will of God.
It's because God judos everything that Satan does, which is, I mean, I hate even using those kinds of terms other than the judos thing. I'm a fan of that, but the concept of God and the concept of Satan has become so trite and jaded, and we're not gonna take it anymore. These terms have been evacuated of their meaning for us, and that's why I think this is really the great value that something like what Tolkien has produced does for us, is can re-enchant our imaginations and allow us to see again rightly what actually exists in the world, because the familiar symbols and phrases have been so pop culturized, so Disneyfied, so just vapid and meaningless, really, to us.
I like Disney. They have been divested of meaning. They no longer have any meaning to them, and we use these terms without even knowing what we're talking about, really. So yes, you're right. The reinvigoration of the imagination, because you come back from this sorrow, this sorrow everybody is going to experience, even the most trite and shallow people in the world, even the most convicted of their socialist ideas, even those people are going to experience suffering. It's universal. It's that Buddhist idea of in order to understand nirvana, you have to beg from a house that's never experienced pain. Beg a bowl of rice from a house that's never experienced pain, and then you will understand, what this idea is. But it's like everybody experiences it, so you can't get away from it. But once you experience it, to slightly turn that Dune metaphor, once it passes over you and through you, then you can turn and look to see the path that taken. And that's when you come roaring back. That's when you come back with a greater vigor, as it says, not just, they learn wisdom, but they also learn strength of spirit. I love that line, strength to the spirit that Nienna gives, because that feeds right into the next character, doesn't it?
Yes.
Where does Tulkas?
Because the greatest in strength and deeds of prowess is Tulkas, who laughs as he slays. Again, he's just jolly. We tend to think of the jolly fellow as either this sort of Dionysian, Santa Clausy, plump, happy, the jollity. No, this is a guy who goes around battling for fun. It's reminiscent of so many. Well, there's so many instantiations of him in the Arthurian cycles. This laughing, chuckling warrior. This is just fun and games, like a toddler at play. Come crashing through the castle of blocks that you just built.
It's the king in the Gawain and the Green Knight. It's the king of the White Castle.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, guess what? I mangled a boar today. It's
Yeah,
really, it's an amazing image.
it's all fun and
He's,
games.
Astaldo the Valiant. It's
Yes,
what a great line.
Tulkas,
You know?
Astaldo the Valiant. He came to Arda to aid the Valar. So it's like he's not one of the first ones who came down.
No.
There's a sense that Ainur, he's one of the Ainur who kind of came as an afterthought, said, "Wow, hey, those guys get to fight. I'd like to do that. I'm gonna go fight. Is this a private fight? Can anybody join? Let's get on down there.
A
Let's
hockey player
get on my
jumping on the
horse."
ice.
Yeah. He delights in wrestling and contests of strength. He rides no steed, where he can outrun all things that go on feet, and he's tireless. And all of a sudden, there's this Hiawatha figure. There's all these great warriors of the past who can run long distances without tiring. It's just great.
There are two characters that particularly come to mind here. One is Thor,
Mm-hmm.
the real Thor, not the Marvel. The
Yeah.
Thor, okay, and the other one is Hercules or Heracles. Okay,
Yes.
Thor who's the god of thunder, is also this god who's always getting duped, but he takes it with a grain of salt. He never loses his manliness, even when he's wearing a dress and disguised as a woman. He's able to drink more than anybody else and fight more than
Mm-hmm.
anybody else and destroy things more than anybody else. So it's that image of just, not this guy, not this lobster. I'm going to fight with the last of my breath,
Right.
even pinned against the wall, fighting back. That's the image of Thor, and it also is Hercules. For those of you who follow Disney only, Heracles is the glory, the kleos of Hera, the bright lady. So he serves the bright lady, but only
Sure.
because she puts all these impediments on his way, like, try this out, big boy, and he does, and he's
It's
like,
woohoo, thank you. Can I have another?
yeah, oh, stable, I'll tackle that,
Sure.
a nine-headed dragon, I got it,
Right. Just don't put the cloak on.
Yeah, right, exactly. Don't put the cloak on. But even Heracles is a god of the sun, of fire, and of
Mm-hmm.
warmth, and of great drinking, and great womanizing, and great hardiness in battle. And he was an icon for Greeks. He was like the superhero of the Greeks. And over again, they would have altars to him. There's actually one over at Providence Academy, just for the record. But they would sacrifice to Heracles to get that power, to get that resilient response.
Resilience. That's a great way to put it. Yeah.
Because
exactly
the negativity of the world seeks to engulf us.
And I think that's another key point. Our imaginary now of sort of like the hero, the guy who's most, what does it look like to be resilient, is to be like, what's it? This hard bitten, tough guy, Yes, late Clint Eastwood is just get the hell off my lawn, like that. That's what resiliency looks like. Like, well, he's showing something else. That resilience is actually this. You're having fun with it. You're not worn down. You're not bitter. You're not strong but bitter, or strong but cynical. You endure, but you endure with joy. Yes. And that's a very different kind of picture.
The line here, his weapons are his hands. I don't need no weapons. Or there's a line,
right.
If you haven't read the great Frank Miller comic graphic novel, The Dark Knight Returns, it's a great graphic novel. But there's so many lines in there that just stand out. And one of them where Batman says to Joker, he says, I always thought there was nothing wrong with you that I couldn't fix with my bare hands. You go, guy. It is sort of like this. Tulkas is this guy. He's like, I got this. And he just charges in and fixes it with his knuckles.
Right.
It's amazing.
With his knuckles.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, he has a spouse.
Yeah. Yeah.
He has a spouse. His spouse is Nessa. His spouse is Nessa, who's the sister of Orome. And we'll hear about Orome next. But Nessa is lithe and fleet-footed, the deer she loves, and they follow in her train whenever she goes in the wild. So you see herds of deer prancing over the meadows. It's because they're following Nessa.
And she
can outrun them.
She is an image.
She's a dancer.
Yep, she's a dancer. Yep, and she is as swift as an arrow. It's all these are images that are Artemisian.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
and there's a famous story in Greek of Artemis and the hunter, whose name eludes me, but he's often associated with Orion,
Hmm.
and that he sees her in her bath, and so she changes her hounds and says Actaeon, I think his name is, and sets the hounds on him, and they devour him. But they all get set into the stars. They become star-like figures in the sky eventually.
Hmm.
So there is this image of um, the big, jolly, powerful man having this association with the Artemisian character, who in Greek
Right.
mythology she's a virginal goddess, but here they're wedded. I like that image. They're wedded,
Yeah.
and I don't quite know how to express this, but I can say this: in a good relationship between a manly man and a womanly woman, there's no cringing. They
Right.
fight tooth and claw. As Chesterton said, marriage is a duel to the death. You know? Look, you may be a great man and you may be strong of spirit, but you aren't going to tangle and win with your woman. Your woman's going to beat your, you know, if you aren't careful. And that's something which I think Tolkien was aware of. He married a woman who was beautiful, but extremely strong of spirit.
Right.
And
And
most of his,
also prone to dancing.
and prone to dancing. Yes, and swift as an arrow.
And swift as an arrow. And so that's an interesting thing too. So we see here this couple which should serve, we want to have in the background of our minds when we see the encounter of um the one-handed the one-handed guy that steals the Silmaril with
Oh,
Tinuviel. Jeez,
yeah.
I'm not today's not my day for names.
You kind of like, like that one
Baron.
guy.
I kept wanting to say Beorn. I'm like, no, not Beorn, the other one. No, 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 no. Come on, give me something better. Baron the one-handed.
Yes,
Yes,
you're the one ended,
when
right.
Baron sees Luthien. Now, just because, like, okay, allow me to go kind of deep with that for a second. What we have, the ordering of these gods matters, as we've said before, and as Mr. Lass, you were just indicating, you've got Nienna, who through grief teaches wisdom. And then we get to Tulkas and the Tulkas Nessa combo, right? Nessa is dancing, she was a force. Okay, Luthien Tinuviel got it, right? There's dancing, she's goddess like, right? She's half goddess, we'll get to that. But okay, that Baron the one-handed, okay, mighty warrior, but what happens to Baron grows up, everybody dies. He's
Yes.
like sole last survivor as a young man, child from his village. His dad is everybody died. He sees them all dead. This is a man who's seen sorrow and suffering,
Yeah.
and he becomes a mighty warrior and weds the dancing goddess type figure, Luthien Tinuviel. So again, you've got that sequence of extreme suffering and grief, and mighty strength and prowess, and yet also joy coupled with, and as a couple, when we get into their story, Baron and Luthien, it's the two of them as would-be spouses, right? They're both fighting to have the right to marry each other. They're fighting not against each other, fighting alongside each other, because English is tricky that way. Fighting with each other, fighting alongside each other to win a Silmaril from the crown of Morgoth, right? And the only way that one could do that is if you keep some sort of jollity inside of you. Otherwise, you'd be totally worn down by the swamps of sadness.
Interesting point. That it just occurred to me, and I have no idea whether this is a reality or not. But there's a figure in Lord of the Rings that's often overlooked or glossed over, or excised from the film. I wonder whether or not there isn't a connection here with Tom Bombadil.
Yes,
Do you
yes,
think? You think?
yes. Thanks. Just what I
No?
was thinking. We don't ever see him fight per
Right.
se, except for when he does. Because remember, he defeats the Barrow Wight. He
Yeah.
actually goes in there and literally pummels it
Yeah.
with his bare hand,
Quite
takes his
handily.
foot off, and slaps the hand that's crawling away like he's hitting a spider.
Yeah.
And then the thing caves in and he comes out laughing.
Yeah. True
It's
that.
very. I'm not saying he is Tulkas, because I don't think he is, but he's embodying
How
Tulkasness
interesting. And
in that
Goldberry.
moment. And
Goldberry,
Goldberry is very much this
right?
of the same cut of the same cloth.
She loves to sing. She loves to dance, right?
Right.
Interesting. That's an
It's
interesting thought.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Huh.
Because at
Okay.
first blush, I think not a fighter, but that's like the last big thing he does is he actually takes on an undead thing
Yeah.
and beats it to pieces with his bare knuckles.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, that's true. Huh. Interesting. Okay.
And
Moving on.
then there's his brother-in-law, Orome, right? Because he's supposed to Nessa. Nessa's brother is Orome. He's a mighty lord. If he's less strong than Tulkas, he's more dreadful in anger. So where Tulkas is prone to laughing, well, he knocks the heads off his enemies with his bare hands. Uh, Orome can like get his rage on and really berserker kind of situation. He loved the lands of Middle Earth. So Tulkas laughs ever. Where are we here? He's more dreadful in anger, whereas Tulkas laughs ever in sport or war, because for him it's the same. And even in the face of Melkor, Tulkas laughed in the face of Melkor before the Elves ruled. Orome loved the lands of Middle Earth. He left them unwillingly and came last to Valinor. So it's almost like he's a little bitter, maybe, from leaving Middle Earth. And he hangs out with the Valar. He's got a rage issue. He's got a chip on his shoulder.
Yes.
He's not the key warrior. He's not the hero. He's not the warrior hero. He's the hunter.
Right.
So
Right.
he's a little bit more hard bitten, maybe.
And
The huntsman.
that that reference is something that happens later when the gods basically go to Valinor. They leave Middle Earth, go to Valinor. But it does have in it the remnants of that great story of the Song of Roland.
Yeah.
Tolkien would have been familiar with, where Roland is this very valiant warrior, and he chooses to stay behind to protect the king of France, basically, from the Giants. And he loses his life in that battle there, the Roncesvalles Pass. But he is the rear guard, basically.
Yeah.
Which would have been a very honored and dangerous position, and that's kind of where Orome is. It's not just that he comes last and unwillingly to Valinor. He's kind of the rear guard against Melkor in Middle Earth. So there is
yeah, and he's able to be the rear guard because he loves. He uniquely in a unique way deeply loves the hills and what does it say? The lands of Middle Earth.
Yes.
The hills and valleys. He returned even to the hills and plains. He often of old would pass back east over the mountains. He would come back from Valinor. He'd like sneak out at night and go running across the fields.
Yeah.
Because he loves to hunt the monsters and fell beasts.
Yeah.
He's the hunter of monsters and fell beasts. So he goes around fighting off, hunting down these things that prowl in the dark, that have been let loose by Morgoth to prowl in the world. He goes and he slays them, he hunts them down. He delights in horses and hounds, and he loves all trees. He's called Aldaron. Where did I know that before? But he's called Aldaron. And by the Sindar, Tauron, he's the Lord of Forests. The Lord of Forests. Nahar is the name of his horse. So he has a horse, a white horse, who's white shining in the sun and shining silver at night.
Yep.
This is like the Mayaras that we see later.
Yeah, it's images of light in the sun, and that shows in other areas there in Lord of the Rings. One of the things that we have to take into account here when we're talking about characters like Orome and Middle Earth is that Middle Earth is not wholly controlled by Melkor, but as we will see, Melkor's infection and Melkor's war against the Valar really taints Middle Earth almost to a point of corruption. A question to ask when you get to Hobbit and Lord of the Rings is, why are there so many darn goblins everywhere? Because they infest everything. Why are there these creatures like Balrog or like the dragons? Why do they even exist? It's as though that territory, that Middle Earth, is almost under the total control of Melkor, which is a commentary on our own world as well. Who is the prince of this world? Well, it's Satan. I hate to say it, but it's true. And that the control of this world, there's a battle, there's a constant war going on in this world against those forces of darkness and those forces that want to cause despair and destruction. Same thing in Middle Earth. He is not. Orome is able to hunt monsters and loves hunting monsters because he loves Middle Earth and he hates the infection that is in Middle Earth. And that's why he keeps sneaking out at night, as you said, in order to do this. The
Exactly.
monsters and fell beasts. Right. So.
And exactly. And to give us a picture of what he is like, there's one allusion. This is not the it's not the only time one of the Valar are mentioned in Lord of the Rings, but it's the only time he's mentioned, and he's almost the only one other than Varda, who is Elbereth, thank you, who's Elbereth, other than her, that's mentioned. And that's in this area that we would be quick to overlook if we didn't know who Orome was from what we've just been doing in the Valaquenta. And that is the charge of the Rohirrim to break the siege of Gondor.
Right.
And if I can just read a passage, I'll even abridge it, but here it is. So there was the Rohirrim are all lined up, waiting to charge, and they see Gondor hopelessly besieged. Despair, right? Everybody just, there's this weight that comes down on everybody. And for a searing second, so there was a flash as though lightning, and then they heard a boom rolling over the great fields. At that sound, the bent shape of the king, that's King Theoden, sprang suddenly erect. Tall and proud he seemed again, and rising up in his stirrups, he cried in a loud voice, more clear than any there had ever heard a mortal man achieve before. Arise, arise, riders of Theoden! Fell deeds awake, fire and slaughter! Spears shall be shaken, shields be splintered, a sword day, a red day, ere the sun rises. Ride now, ride to Gondor! And with that he seized the great horn from Guthlaf, his banner-bearer, and he blew such a blast upon it that it burst asunder, and straightway all the horns in the host were lifted up in music, and the blowing of the horns of Rohan in that hour was like a storm upon the field and a thunder in the mountains. Ride now, ride to Gondor! Suddenly the king cried to Snowmane, and the horse sprang away. Behind him his banner blew in the wind, the white horse upon a field of green, but he outpaced it. After him thundered the knights of his house, but he was ever before them. Eomer rode there, the white horsetail of his helm floating in his speed, and the front of the first Eored roared like a breaker foaming on the shore. But Theoden could not be overtaken. Fey he seemed, or the battle fury of his fathers ran like new fire in his veins, and he was borne up on Snowmen like a god of old, even as Orome the Great in the battle of the Valar when the world was young. His golden shield was uncovered, and lo, it shone like an image of the sun, and the grass flamed into green about his white feet of his steed. For morning came, morning and wind from the sea, and the darkness was removed, and the hosts of Mordor wailed, and terror took them, and they fled and died, and the hoofs of wrath rode over them.
Well read. And honestly, unless you're some bleeding heart modern, there's no sorrow that the orcs bleed and die and flee. No, nobody cares. You're like, hey, buddy, we're glad you're gone.
I mean, and just reading that,
Wonderful.
If you've got a heart of flesh, you're like, okay, get up. You pull the sword out, charge. I don't know where we're going. We're going to charge something.
Yeah. I know. And even that image of the horns, this is not so exciting to read, but this bit here about the Valaroma. The Valaroma is the name of his great horn, Orome's great horn. The sound of which is like the upgoing of the sun in scarlet, or the sheer lightning cleaving the clouds. Above all the horns of his host, it was heard in the woods that Yavanna brought forth in Valinor. So it's like if you ever hear a thunderclap, right? Or if you could imagine the sun rising, making a sound, that's the horn of Orome, the Valaroma. This is really kind of intriguing, because I know Tolkien probably didn't know this, but there was speculation that all the planets made sounds, and that goes back.
Sure. That's very well known.
Recent science has apparently proven that that's actually true. All the planets make tones as they circle.
There literally is a music of the spheres?
There really is. And this is really creepy, but there's also music of the black holes. And the black holes sounds like screaming. It sounds like voices in agony. It's really, it gives me chills to think about this, that when you see the sun rising, and I know it doesn't rise, folks. I know the world rotates,
but it does.
blah, blah, blah.
It does.
But it does. It does. Not just heat and radiation come to the earth as we turn towards the sun, but life and light and new hope and the possibility of a new day and infinite chances for resurrection. The forces of hell shall not prevail, and they get cracked open on that third day when Christ rises from the tomb, and there is this sound like the blowing of horns. And Orome blowing his horn at that point. That's why Tolkien over and over again in his story, The Lord of the Rings especially, has these images of like rising up, Surge, right? Surge, Re Surexit. He has that over and over again. And they're always accompanied by this sort of horn-like thing, and the valiant, and the sun rising at Helm's Deep. I will not be caught like a badger in a trap. And then Theoden blows the horns, and he rides out, and they destroy the. It's really not a It's not a well-crafted myth. Here, to quote Peter in his letter, it's not a well-crafted myth. It is the capturing of a reality of the world if you see it in light of being charged with the grandeur of God. I mean, if you see it as just a machine, we're just rotating towards the sun like a chicken on a spit, and getting basted.
Just a gear.
Yeah, what the hell? Who cares? It's just one day after another anyway, right? But if you see it as the world really has charge to it, then you have the possibility of renewal and changing your life I'm getting worked up here, but I'm thinking of that recent conversion of Black China. What was her name? She just converted to Christianity, and she's like on fire about it. And she's getting rid of all of the old images of darkness that she used to be. She's a famous rapper, but she's getting rid of all these images of darkness because she says, I don't want these anymore. I want my life to be changed and full of light. And it's that, it's the blowing of the horns, right? That Orome embodies.
Yes.
I love that.
His spouse is Vana, the ever young. She is the younger sister of Yavanna. So Vana is the younger sister of Yavanna.
Yeah, okay.
All flowers spring as she passes, and open if she glances upon them, and all birds sing at her coming. She is the archetype of all Disney princesses.
Yes, she is, but she's also the archetype of Easter.
Yes.
Because Easter itself used to be, in the Celtic mythology, Easter is a goddess, Esther. And she's a goddess of renewal and of
springtime,
plants and springtime and flowers and bunny rabbits. And that's where we get all that imagery that surrounds the Easter resurrection holiday.
It comes from the northern traditions of this new spring, the sun, everything coming to life again.
Because they recognize, like Tolkien does, that renewal of life is itself, what do you call it? A parallel image to that constant possibility of renewal, the myth of eternal return, the sol invictus. The sun isn't conquered. That ultimately the images of light and life and resurrection do triumph over the images of darkness. What's the line that Frodo says? The darkness cannot prevail forever. Is that what it is? I forget. From the Lord.
Something like that. Yeah.
But I love that. It's a great line. The darkness will not prevail forever.
That's true.
The darkness, the shadow is but a passing thing.
The shadow is but a passing thing.
That's
right. So,
we said.
I think that's a great
stop.
We've finished the Valar.
Yay!
And next, the Maiar. And with that, we'll flow seamlessly into the beginning of days.
Yes.
Because the mystery of the Maiar, just to give a little teaser here, is that the Maiar are these other spirits, lesser perhaps in potency and power, but they're the same order of the Valar, if to a lesser degree. The Maiar are called the people of Valar. They're servants and helpers. Their number is not known to the elves, which is who's writing this. That's kind of the frame of all of this, right? Who's writing this? And their number is not known. And few even have names in any of the tongues of the children of Iluvatar. For though it is otherwise in Aman, in the Blessed Realm, in Middle-earth, the Maiar seldom appear in forms visible to elves and men, where the Valar sometimes will put on a garment that can be seen, these powerful experiences of the gods. The Maiar are the things not just visible, but invisible, that Iluvatar created and have entered into the earth, other personal agencies that are at work everywhere in the world. And we get to meet some of them in our next episode.
Right. All things visible and invisible. Good place to stop. Dr. Thompson,
Good.
I thank you very much. It's another good discussion. So I will end with the Aquilic salutation and we'll go our separate ways.
All right.
Farewell wherever you fare. To Ares receive you at the journey's end.
And may the wind under your wings bear you to where the sun sails and the moon walks.